Welcome, guys, to another episode of the Spring Forward podcast. I'm your host, Spring Richardson-Perry, and today we have a very special episode lined up for you. We are talking to Chad Bareither, and he's a process improvement professional that has almost 20 years of experience in setting organizational strategy. He's also improved processes to get better results, and then also working on sustaining performance with a management system. And so he has a book out right now called Improve Less, the Focus and Align Framework for Sustainable Continuous Improvement. So I want to bring him on so that we can talk about that. So let's welcome Chad. Hi, Chad.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to have you here. Now, first, did I get your last name right? Is it Bareither?
It's Bareither.
Bareither. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
But how's it going?
Going well. We're at least in our house, we're just coming off a spring break. So that's just busy getting back into the normal jaunt of things. We got 3 kids that are in, up through middle school. So other than that, end of first quarter, coming off a spring break. So it's a little non-standard start to the week, but everything's good.
Yes, I get it. It's almost the end of the year, so we're kind of on the downslope from here, hopefully, Well, I'm excited to get started and jump right into your book and kind of talk about your focus and align framework that you use as you're working with different organizations. The first thing I want to really talk about is how you got started. What was your journey up to this point?
Okay, so originally I went to school for engineering, was focused in things like product design and manufacturing. And my first career position coming out of education was actually for the U.S. Army. I was working as a civilian, so not active duty, but we were doing development projects for new capabilities for our warfighters. And it was very apparent, right, that the best design doesn't mean anything unless you've thought about how to produce it. And so I got more and more interested in the manufacturing and the production system around a lot of these designs. So my career kind of naturally migrated towards things like quality and reliability. And it was about that time that just very serendipitous for me that the particular center I was working for within the Army was exploring a program called Lean Six Sigma, which was all about process improvement through the reduction of variation. So making sure that every time we execute a process, whether transactional, so like in the business back office or on the manufacturing floor, it's repeatable so we get a good quality output. So I fell in love with it immediately, did some training and certification in that, got an opportunity to travel around to different defense contractors and kind of promote that gospel for a while, and then worked in a series of Fortune 500 companies as an internal change agent, doing largely the same thing of identifying opportunities for improvement and coaching the teams along to be able to solve those problems and sustain them themselves. Now, through that experience, a kind of common thread and why I decided to go out on my own was this challenge that often we're trying to do too many things. So the whole genesis behind that title, Improve Less, is thinking about if we can narrow down our priorities, really think up front, it becomes a lot easier to change. We can move faster and we can sustain that on the back end. So early in my career, was able to find that niche. Very fortunate to find that early on, and that has stayed as like a common thread through my career journey till now.
That's awesome. And that's one of the things that I like about your book, the title, Improve Less, because I do find that we're always looking for like the next best thing, right? So what's going to work better? What can we do to improve this? Sometimes there are things that we can do. Sometimes there's not things that we can do. Sometimes it works to the best of its capability in that moment. But one thing I want to touch on here is the Lean Six Sigma that you were talking about. Does your focus and align framework, does that mimic that in any way?
It uses concepts from it. So the major methodology that's drawn out of that in my history is a five-step method for problem solving. So we use this acronym DMAIC, DMAIC, define the problem, measure the process, analyze the root cause, improve the performance, and then control and sustain the solution. And so that's the main takeaway that's come out of that. What I recognized through application in some of these larger organizations is that there needs to be a larger umbrella, like tying this together, that we can't just improve enterprise level or business level performance by kind of like one-off projects here or there. The system level performance rarely rises to meet that like individual improvement project. So it takes concepts of some of the tools, but then based upon what I've seen work, of like knits it together in kind of a broader system. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I got you. Because a lot of people, some people are familiar with it. If you're like an ops person, systems and structures, you get Lean Six Sigma. And then some people don't know what Lean Six Sigma is all about. And so you have the different, almost like karate, right? Where you have the different belts, and then you get all the way up to the black belt. And that helps you with putting structures and processes and moving things forward. And so just to give y'all a little background information, if you're
Let me
not
just
familiar with it.
just really quick, we'll back up and say, so where does that term even come from? Because it sounds a little strange. So sigma is a Greek letter in the Greek alphabet. And in mathematics, we use that lowercase sigma letter. It represents a measurement known as standard deviation. That just means how much a process changes. Like if you need to drive to work or the grocery store or somewhere, it never takes you exactly the same time, right? Depending upon weather and traffic and construction, there's some range that happens in. So sigma is a mathematical measure that tells you what should you expect is like normal, like trip to trip, how much it's going to change. So it's a measure of the variation in the process. We can measure that same thing in any business process or manufacturing process. So the Six Sigma then comes in of Motorola back in the 1980s. It was their internal branded program, which then some folks took outside and made a bunch of money selling it as a improvement program. But Six Sigma was originally a branded program internal, so it meant 6 of these standard deviation measures. Try to just control the variation within a process. So that's all Six Sigma really is. There's probably going to be some people up in arms that I made it that simple, but for your listeners, like it is that simple. It's about removing change in a process. So how do we make a process more predictable so you always get the result that you want, whether you're measuring that in terms of revenue or quality or lead time? We just want to make sure it's more predictable. So we try to eliminate or control all of the variables or factors that affect that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I love when we can simplify an overcomplicated thing. So sorry to you guys out there who are just a little up in arms about that, but it just makes it easy for those who are not familiar with that process. Okay, now you have a framework, right? It takes a little bit from the Lean Six Sigma process, but talk to us about the application of that, the implementation. Like, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. So often clients that I'm engaging with are struggling in one of 2 major ways of like, we don't know where to get started. Like we're trying to get better results and we just can't get there, or we've gotten better results and it just doesn't stick, right? They're kind of on a roller coaster of like things get better and then they backslide. And so they're one of the 2 main pain points I'll hear a client say. And then depending upon your industry, like, so for your listeners, if they're more, they're probably not running billion-dollar, Fortune 500 companies. If you're saying, I don't have predictability in my processes, whether that's month-to-month revenue and sales or output or lead time, production capability, whatever it is they're doing in terms of their individual business, they'll say, I wish it was more predictable, or I wish it was more stable. That's the same thing I work with companies, and they're saying that. So we could say more predictable in terms of cost, more predictable in terms of quality, right? So if I make a mistake or send a client something wrong, I have to do it again. It's more of my time. Or lead time, how long it takes to deliver a product or service. And so we anchor the process around one of those metrics. So rather than just saying, hey, these are industry best practices and you should do them, right? We tie it all to, we're going to get you better performance in this area. You tell me, like, kind of like the doctor, like, where does it hurt? Where are you feeling the pain right now? And we start there and we cultivate out this 5-step process that says, well, why do you want to get better? What would better look like? How are we going to get from where we are to there? And then we break that down into small projects, improvements, whatever you want to call them, in terms of who's going to do this and when should we follow up. So those become the 5 steps of the framework. Why do we want to improve? What would improvement look like? How do we get from where we're at to where we want to go? Who's going to do it? And when do we follow up? So it's pretty simple. You said you like
Love
simple.
it.
5 steps.
Yes. I love it. And that's like almost like a basic project management framework in a sense, because project managers are always thinking about, okay, what is it that we're trying to do? We're starting here, we want to end here. So how do we go from point A to point B? Who's going to be involved? What does our budget look like for this? And how is that going to affect, how we get from point A to point B? And all the things in between that you just mentioned. And so I really love that. I love that you're able to break it down like that, but also help people to identify the problem, because I'm sure when in their mind they're thinking, okay, this is the problem because this is where we want to be. Sometimes does that lead to you saying, well, actually, that's not the problem. If this is where you want to be, this is actually the problem. Like, talk to me about that process and what that looks like sometimes.
Yeah, it's a great observation. Oftentimes when we're like in the day-to-day business, what we're talking about is the problem is sometimes a symptom, right? So to use an analogy is like when you get sick, like I have a headache or a fever, it's like, oh, my head hurts, but like that's not the problem. The problem is that you're sick. So you need to address the sickness, not just the fever. Like just taking Tylenol and going through your day and burning the candle at both ends. You need rest and hydration and good nutrition, things like that, to address the problem. The same thing is, oftentimes like, this is the problem. Got it. That's the different result you want. We need to dig deeper in that, kind of like down to the roots of the plant or the tree, and figure out, well, if the tree is dying, like what's happening down at the roots that's allowing that to happen. And most of the time, 99% of the time, there's a process that's broken. So that means either we don't have a process for it or the process isn't working. So back to this discussion about removing variation. If I say, my business is baking cookies, but I don't have a recipe, like that's no process. You're like, so I have one really good batch of cookies and then client's happy. The next batch of cookies is terrible. Like I'm not going to stay in business very long. And it's amazing sometimes that within our business, if we step back and take an objective view, which is most of my role, to help take an objective view of the business and say, like, you have no recipe to get those results. So you've either relied on, you used to do it yourself, so you knew how, but now you've grown, someone else is doing it, and they don't do it the same way as you, so you're getting different results, or they don't do it the same way, so it changes depending upon who's executing.
Right.
So oftentimes we're looking at the symptom, the outcome, the result, and like we're like, that's the problem. And it's like, true, that's how we're going to measure success, but the problem lies somewhere in the infrastructure, the root system of your business.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of times I think businesses get into, as they're growing, they have these growing pains, but they haven't written down these SOPs. And so they don't have any, like you said, a recipe, right? And me as the baker, I know, okay, I'm using a pinch of this, a cup of this, and a tablespoon of this here and there. But then when it goes to the next person, when I need you to do it, it's like, oh, I use flour and I use butter and I use salt and I use sugar, and just throw it all together. And they throw it all together and it tastes nothing like what I create, right? And it's because in my head, I know what I do, but I haven't written it down to solidify it, so that the next person can follow those steps. And so, I love that that you've sort of demystified this process, because a lot of times people don't realize how important that one step is to just
Mhm.
getting it out of our head and onto a piece of paper so that someone else can replicate that. Because if that is the heart of your business and someone cannot replicate what the heart of your business is, you're not going to be in business.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and so, depending upon where your listeners are at, right? So either in the back of their head, like I want to work less, or I want to scale my business and grow my business. Like if you don't have some of those key things defined, that's where you end up with the symptoms, right? It's not predictable now. And so, and part of my approach to the whole improve less concept is you don't need to write an SOP or develop a process or automate or mistake proof everything.
right.
Is within that process, when we get to the how, we actually map out and say, well, which processes actually affect this result? Which ones don't exist or are not performing? So I recently had an engagement with a client. They're like, well, these are all the business processes we need to define. I'm like, I don't disagree with you. All of those probably need to be defined someday. But right now, this is your problem. And these are the 4 processes that are affecting it. So does that feel more manageable? Like 4 versus, I don't know what the number is. So we'll say 40. Like 4 feels more manageable to spend. Let's spend the next 3 months developing and training 4 processes and see if we get the better results. Then you want to
Yeah.
go back to your next biggest priority. I mean, that's strategy, right? That is focusing your team and saying, this is what we're doing now, clear objectives. I know what I'm doing. Strategy is not, here's the 40 things we need to change this year. 40 things, that's like 1 a week. Like that's not the way to run a business.
At all. And that's not really feasible. It's not really realistic to think that you'll be able to get these things down and then make these processes effective if you're doing all of these different things at once. And so again, your improve less title is makes even more sense as we talk about this, right? Because and it's funny that we say this, right? Doing less equals more,
Mhm.
but it's so true. Even in my own business, where I was like trying to do all the things, the less that I did, the more productive I was. And it seems contradictory, almost cliche, right? But it it's true, you can't, it's like being a jack of all trades and a master of none. You
Mhm.
can't do all the things and expect to be effective at all the things. Pick pick a problem, focus on that, get good at that, then move to the next thing, right? So I love that you've again simplified this and really sort of demystified this process for people. I want to dive into what you feel like is most important in your book. What do you think is one of the key takeaways from Improve Less, the focus on aligned framework for sustainable and continuous
Yeah,
improvement?
like if there's a, I mean, let improve less is it's fun because it's contradictory to common knowledge, right? I think the most important word in there to think about is sustainable, and that's because I don't want to fix a problem and then fix that same problem again next year, right? I remember early on in my career, this is way back when I was with the Army, of running into a production quality issue. I was at a defense contractor in the summer heat in Arkansas, an unair conditioned.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. It wasn't comfortable, but it was fun.
Right.
And there was a particular problem that was on the line. We don't need to get into the details, but talking with the quality manager at the time, and he looks at me and says, "Oh, no big deal. We've solved that problem dozens of times before." And I'm like, well, if you've solved the problem a dozen times, like it shouldn't be coming
It
back.
shouldn't still be a problem.
And so sustainable is the important part of all of this, because if I'm the business leader, I don't want to have to spend my time fixing that again.
Right.
And
Right.
so, but where does sustainment come in? Like in the long run is saying, I've gotten better performance. How does it stick? So you mentioned things like SOPs and processes and that's great, right? And that's probably needed. Once your business is growing or scaling or it's stable and you just want to work less, is being able to sustain a level of performance requires a culture and behavior that is attuned to that discipline of I follow the process and I do it the right way and I have a high quality standard. But those behaviors and culture, like if you want to say that's your culture and your values, like those are cultivated through process and system. Like I know that doesn't sound very sexy, but saying we have a way that we do things here and that's how we do it. And over time, through that muscle memory, that develops the behaviors and the values and the culture that is either you as a solopreneur, or if you have a small team, or you have a business of 100, 200, 500 people, is that you sustain it over time by setting clear expectations of how this process is to get done, how long it takes, how much it costs, and the level of quality. And then like over time, that just becomes the way we do things. So
Mm-hmm.
on the back end, so we talked about that problem solving methodology. Once we get to the control phase and we've made a change and we want to sustain it, well, that's sustained through leadership. So another element of this improve less is if we change too many things, as a leader in the organization, I only have a finite capacity to manage all of those changes, right? So if we go back that example with the client I mentioned, 40, we're going to introduce and train 40 new processes. Great. So when are you going to follow up on them to make sure that they're being done correctly, that everyone understands them, that we're executing the process in the right sequence at the right timing and getting the right quality out of it? Like there is, before this becomes muscle memory, like there's some leadership coaching through this. You could take, any new skill or exercise routine or diet plan or whatever, any change to your personal life. Like at first you have a little bit of a dip, right? This is harder. I'm not getting the results I want. Eventually you rebound,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
if leadership isn't there to coach the organization through the dip, like you don't get to the improvement. And
You
so like,
never get to the improvement. And
if
that's,
we're trying to change so many things, I think sometimes leadership says, yeah, go change all that stuff. It's like, oh no, then on the back end, I'm going to be responsible for sustaining all that. Maybe I should improve less, fewer things, so that I can actually be the agent of change and coaching the organization until that becomes muscle memory and we've stabilized at another level of performance. That's where sustainability comes in. Not the project's over, we dust our hands onto the next one. Like who's staying behind to make sure that we are doing that correctly? Who's staying behind so that when we have new employees, either because we're scaling up or we have turnover, like who's coaching them and teaching them the insert your company's name way to do that particular process?
yeah. And that's one of the things I teach in my leadership development is inspect what you expect. Because if you don't follow up, how do you know that what your expectations are being met? How do you know that, like you said, if this is a new process, if this is what we're going to be doing, how do you know that this new process is being adhered to, that it's being implemented? How are you going to ensure that you actually are making this change? And I think that's where the ball gets dropped at a lot of the time, is that we say, okay, great, here's this new process, go, let's see what happens. And then the momentum is there in the beginning, maybe the first 2 weeks or so. And then after the fact, there's no follow-up. There's no, okay, how did that go? Is it working? Is there something that we need to maybe change a little bit because that doesn't work the way that we thought it was? So maybe we need to pivot just a little bit in terms of what our initial thoughts were, and now we see that maybe it's going to work this way. And that's one of the things that really, this organization was a health organization, very large health organization, that I worked for over 10 years ago. And they had some really great ideas and some really great things that they were trying to implement, but it was too much at one time. And they would come one day with like, okay, we're going to do it this way now. We're going to do this. We're going to make it this way. And then 2 weeks later, there's no follow-up. There's nobody saying, oh, how does that work? There was no one to even really walk you through the implementation of it. It was just, this is what we're going to do. Go figure it out. And then when it wasn't figured out, reverts back to the old process, which wasn't working. And then it was just, again, like you said, oh, we fixed that problem before, let's fix it again. Well, it's not really fixed because if it was fixed, this wouldn't be a recurring problem. It wouldn't be coming back up. This wouldn't be a recurring theme. So, you know, I think that's probably one of the most important things and probably one of the key takeaways, like you said, sustainability. And having sustainability, you need to be able to inspect what you expect, because otherwise, if we're not following up or following through with anything, what, there's going to be no real change.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it can be tempting in a business to look at someone who's, another business, a competitor, a different industry that's out in front of you, either in terms of, scale or quality or whatever. In my line of work, and I've worked with a lot of manufacturing companies, we might look to like a Toyota, right, or like a Danaher, and I mean those systems took 20 years to mature. So sometimes
Yeah.
we want like the quick fix. In our daily lives, what's your favorite? Do you watch any sports?
I like lots of sports: football, basketball.
Football, basketball. Do you have a favorite singer, recording
Favorite
artist?
singer? Who's my favorite singer? I guess Beyonce. We could say
Okay.
Beyonce.
So like if we're watching well, there's not a lot of football on right now, so it's Final Four. If we're watching basketball, a lot of times we can watch professional athletes and be like, wow, they're so gifted. They're so talented, right? We kind of dismiss the fact of like, they practice 40 hours a week. We can look
Yeah.
at, we can look at Beyonce, right? And the mark she's had on the industry and be like, well, she's just a very talented singer. It's like, she took lessons, she practiced, like she doesn't just like walk up on stage and make magic happen.
Right.
If you don't mind me interjecting, so I have two like middle school girls, so they're Swifties. So
Oh.
Taylor Swift just went on this big Eras tour, and
Uh-huh.
I think it's still going on. Like when she was practicing for that, this was an interview she did for Time Magazine. She would run on the treadmill and sing the entire set, right? So like while jogging, it's like 4 hours. I mean, it's like a marathon. Like, and so we're just like, wow, she's really talented. It's like, no, she put in the work.
She put in
So
the work.
you can look at your organization and be like, oh, man, they've got this good thing. We're going to do what they're doing and then we'll be that good. It's like eventually, but back to your point about inspect what you expect, or, building this muscle memory, it's going to take time, and that's not at all to be discouraging. But like, if you are expecting your business or want your business to get like to that level of greatness, like it's going to take time, and just, promote the discipline, those processes. How you practice is how you play, and saying, we're going to build that over time. And this is an investment in the long term. It's not like a get great overnight scheme.
Absolutely. And I think that's like a great ending point, right? To say, over time, it takes time, as with anything, and you can get there, but it's necessary to have that discipline, and to repeat these processes, to have it in place, and then to press repeat over and over and over again. And that's how they got good, right? I'm thinking about Amazon, who spent, I want to say, 14 years in the red before they actually started turning a profit. And look, it's like a giant right now. So you've got to put in the work. We're such a microwave society where it's like, oh, I've done this for 30 days and now I should be a billionaire. Doesn't quite work like that.
Mm-hmm.
It takes discipline, and I think that's where we're sort of starting to fall off these days, is that discipline to sit down and rinse and repeat. And so, I've enjoyed this. My saying is, it doesn't have to be long to be strong, and you dropped some true gems today, Chad. I'm so appreciative. Guys, remember his book again, Improve Less. It is the focus and alignment framework for sustainable continuous improvement. If they want to reach out to you, Chad, how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I'm most active on the LinkedIn platform, so you can look up my name, Chad Bareither, Bareither. Improve Less. There's not a lot of books with that title, so you can find that on Amazon and link out to me through that. So it's saleable through Amazon and paperback. Oh, I'm sorry, Kindle, paperback, and hard copy. So that's the
Awesome.
easiest way to get in touch with me. And honestly, if you have any questions, you're like, I didn't get that, or I don't believe you, I have a difference of opinion, or you're like, I want to know more, my direct contact information's in the book, is on my LinkedIn. So drop me a line. Happy to talk about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chad. I appreciate you being here today.
Thanks.
And
I
guys,
appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, again, grab his book, Improve Less, the Focus and Align Framework for Sustainable Continuous Improvement. Reach out to him on LinkedIn, Chad Bareither. His information is also in his book. And hopefully this blesses you the way that it has for me. So have a good time, guys. Thanks for tuning in today. And until next time on the Spring Forward podcast.